That should be fine.
So could you also give like permission to the JIBA tablet to share?
That's done as well.
Okay, so
yeah, we're all in. Yeah. It's already live on YouTube.
So can you see that scribble?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, that's
Hello? Are we ready? So then I let people in. I mean, we are live already, but
yeah. So I can hold on. What? Yeah, I mean, I'm ready. What before you let people in, what are we going to do in terms of timing and stuff like that? Just start and see what happens with. Obviously, the second part was going to be delivered by Chris, who was going to focus on the sort of the international investing part. So
it depends. How many minutes do you think you'll be speaking for once you are on?
I mean, I could probably speak for about 25 minutes, maybe.
Okay, and how do we know if Chris will be in by then?
I guess I'll just have to keep checking my WhatsApp and make and then see if he's on his way back to the office.
Okay, so we see to it. If he's not there, we can continue with Q&A maybe, question answers. And you can maybe continue answering them. And once he pops in, we can allow him to come in and maybe speak for a further 15, 20 minutes. But I think we don't want to run it more than 1 hour, 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, no, it'd be good if, because obviously him being an international advisor.
Okay, great. I think we can admit everybody and maybe get started, if that's okay with us.
all right, Bismillah.
Bismillah, should I go ahead?
Waiting for
JIBA. आधा 1 घंटे की मीटिंग.
Good evening, Assalamu alaikum. Can I request everybody to at least mute themselves first as we get started? Good evening, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the JIBA event today. We are looking into finance matters. Shabar Qasim is joining us today. He is, of course, specialized into advising and looking into rich people looking into the right investment funds. He always prefers simplicity over complexity so that you can easily understand the returns that you're going to earn every year. And also, furthermore, he advises so that you can take and enjoy the money that you reap and putting it in the right places so that you sow the fruits and have a lovely future life. So over to Shabar, and he will, of course, brief us and take us through it. And later on, we can open some Q&A for you to ask any questions. In the meantime, if you have, you can always put them down and we will note it and we'll pass them on to Shabar later on for him to answer you all.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Yeah, my name is Shabar Qasim. It's a privilege to be here with you all this evening. Basically, yeah, I'm going to share some of the knowledge that I have around sort of savings and investments. And as a practicing financial advisor based in the UK, I run a financial planning practice called Lumos Financial. And I'm going to just sort of highlight a few of the areas that I discuss with my clients. And I know, your geographical location means that, rules and legislation are slightly different. But hopefully the principles and the ethos will be very similar, and inshallah there'll be some benefit from today's talk and the Q&A. I am supposed to have a colleague with me called Chris. Chris is an international financial advisor, so he's much better versed in the international landscape when it comes to giving financial advice. But I think when you try and have a virtual coffee in Dar, coupled with a financial advisor in the UK and a financial advisor in Latin America, the time zones kind of just didn't quite work out. So inshallah, he'll be able to jump on and we can benefit from his knowledge as well. So obviously, just to start off, a disclaimer that, the presentation is not meant to be financial advice. I can't give advice to people outside of my jurisdiction. So this is for information only. And as I said, we're sort of sharing best practice knowledge and some of the things that I discuss with my clients. So before we sort of start diving into the topic as such, I always like to sort of think about, what does Islam say about these sort of matters? Being of our faith, it's always good to start with the Quran. And a verse that's really quite pertinent to what we discuss is Surah Al-Furqan, verse 67. And it says, "And they are those who, when they spend, do so not excessively or sparingly, but are ever between that, justly moderate." And I think this theme of moderation is one that we'll sort of touch upon during this talk. But even then, when we look at the words of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, he has said that economizing in one's expenditure is half of livelihood. And that there is no spending more loved by Allah than spending in careful consideration. So this is something that I feel like we need to sort of think about, that when we're talking about money, saving, investing, etc., this middle path, this sort of moderation is quite important to grasp. And it's something that I try and bring into my conversations with clients, especially from our faith, is, what is that middle path? Because the middle path is different for all of us. And I've pretty much summed it up as, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how much is enough? And that might be a question that not a lot of us have ever really sort of thought about, because we're so consumed with the rat race and the pursuit of more. And actually answering this question allows us to be a lot freer in our day-to-day lives. Knowing that we've accumulated enough allows us to know that actually, we've got everything that we need for our comfort in this world. And it allows us to have a better focus and a more fuller life. And I found that with my clients, that actually that the majority of dissatisfaction, anxiety, stress, worry, breakdown in relationships, it all kind of stems from the inability of the human being to know how much is enough. So the question is, how do we answer this? Is it about investing in the best fund out there? Or is it about getting 12% returns a year? I don't think it is. And the work that I do with my clients is around financial planning before we do any investment. So I want to share an idea with you around financial planning and what it is, because it's something that a word or two words that are used quite extensively within our profession, but not a lot of people actually do financial planning. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just doing a little drawing for you, just to try and explain what financial planning is. So inshallah, with the aid of technology, we've got a whiteboard and I'll be able to do some drawing. So the concept that I want you to try and grasp is that we've all got a bucket, okay? And so there's a bucket, and inside our bucket, we've got assets. So without knowing all of you personally, I'm going to assume that we've got, we've got cash, and that could be in various different accounts. That could be within your jurisdiction, or it could be abroad, but you've got money in an account, and you may have investments of some sort, and they could be shares or other types of financial products. But the idea is that they're liquid, so that if you needed them in the next week, you could cash them in and that money would be with you. Okay, so you've got assets that are inside your bucket. You've then got assets that are outside of your bucket. For example, your property. Now, the reason why your property is outside of your bucket is because you can't suddenly sell a few bricks of your home in order to go for Hajj, right? It's just not possible. That money is tied up in your property. So you've got your residential property that you live in, but you also may have a property portfolio which you rent out and you receive an income from. Now, that rental income that you get is money that's, again, the property is outside of your bucket, but the money could potentially flow into your bucket, okay? The next asset that most of us on this call will have is your business. And it's likely that your business is going to be one of, or the largest asset that you've got. But again, your business is outside of your bucket because you can't realize the money or the equity in your business until you sell it at some point in the future. And if you do, then that's money that will also enter into your bucket. So just want to understand that there's assets that you've got inside your bucket and outside your bucket. You've then got inflows, okay? Now, your current inflows will be the income that you take from your business potentially, or if you're employed by someone, then that will be your salary that you receive. And so your inflows are topping up your bucket, okay? Another inflow could be the rental income that you receive. Again, that's topping up your bucket. Fantastic. We've also got future inflows. So at some point in the future, we may have an inheritance. Some of us may inherit from family, and that could fall into our bucket. If, for example, you've worked for an organization or you've been fortunate enough in another part of the world to have built up maybe some sort of social security. I've seen Chris has arrived, so that's fantastic. So if you have built up some social security in other areas, you might receive a social security payment. I don't think that might be applicable in Dar, but for example, in the UK or in Canada or in the US, you may get some help from the state in the future. So what we can see now is we've got assets inside our bucket, outside, and we've got these inflows, which is fine. So our bucket is filling up quite nicely. However, at the bottom of our bucket, we have a tap, and we all have taps. The first tap is our current lifestyle. So that's everything that you like to do at the moment. Your standard of living is dictated by your situation, and we've all got a different standard of living, but generally you'll be spending money on housing, food, shopping, taking your children out, taking your wife out, paying for healthcare, education, going for Umrah, Ziyarat, Hajj, maybe charitable donations, whatever it is that, you know, nice cars, etc. Your lifestyle is personal to you, but definitely it's costing you a certain amount of money, and that's really important. But there will come a point where that current lifestyle ends and a bigger tap gets turned on. Your future lifestyle. Now, your future lifestyle might actually be more costly than your current lifestyle, because in the future, when you've got maybe more time, maybe you don't have to work. The kids have grown up and left home and are building lives of their own. And now you can do all of the things that you've always wanted to do, but never had the time. You might be spending more money. So therefore that tap might actually require, you know, a greater expenditure. But even that tap gets turned off, and a much smaller tap then gets turned on. That's your later life. You're going to be too old. You're not going to be able to get into, you know, traveling across the world. You'll just about be able to get in and out of a car. It's going to be, you know, a period of time where you're going to be spending a lot less. So that's the third tap. And then the last tap, which we all have, is what I call one-offs. So one-offs are your children get married at some point in the future, you're going to have to pay for a wedding, or repairs to your home, or you need to change the car, or a big medical emergency comes up. Those things that always seem to crop up, those are the one-offs. Now, with every client, with every person on the planet, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to run out of money, your bucket will become empty. And if that happens, or if that starts to happen, you're going to have to make some adjustments to your current lifestyle, or maybe your future lifestyle, or the one-offs that you'll be able to draw out. And that means you're going to have to make some sacrifices, which is not great. Secondly, you could have a bucket which overflows, and actually you die with too much money. Now that in itself could be a bit of a problem, because depending on how you've arranged your affairs and what jurisdiction your assets are held in, there could be potential tax on the money that you leave behind. So that could be a potential pitfall by dying with too much money, or not having your affairs well taken care of. But secondly, and I think even worse, is that if you did die with too much in your bucket, think of the things that you didn't get to do, the people that you couldn't help, the charity or the causes that you didn't support while you could have. Because we know as Muslims as well that actually, you know, doing good whilst we're here is far better than leaving money behind for someone else to do good on our behalf. It's much more recommended to utilize the wealth that we've got whilst we're alive. So financial planning, in essence, is quite simply being able to answer that question of how much is enough. Because by looking at your bucket, what's going to happen with that year on year, you can then start to answer some of the questions, which are, okay, well, how much money do I need for the rest of my life in order to really satisfy me for the lifestyles that I want at the different stages of life? And potentially, when can I stop working? How much do I have to sell my business for in order to be financially okay? And then you can start to look at how do you manage the assets in order to make them tax efficient, to get the best returns, and all of that stuff, which comes sort of secondary. So, and another important thing is obviously how to protect your bucket as well, because for a lot of us, if an unexpected event happened, and let's say we died prematurely, or let's say we fell sick or became ill, you know, what happens to our bucket in that situation. And that's another benefit of sort of financial planning and getting that set before we start concentrating on investments. So hopefully that made some sense in regards to why we look at financial planning first and foremost. And then we start to focus on the investment side of things. So I need to find my Zoom. So I've stopped the share there. Okay, so can we see the screen again? The slides visible?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So as we said, so the value is in the long-term financial planning, backed up then by investment portfolios, which are simply a means by which we achieve financial goals. So where do we invest? Well, generally investment portfolios, which is what I'm concentrating on today, focus on two types of assets. We've got equities, also known as shares, where you're an owner of a company or a part owner. So when you buy shares in Apple, Amazon, Google, you become a part owner of those companies. And then you've got bonds, which means that you're a loaner. You're lending money to the governments around the world or to financial or to corporations. And those are the main asset classes. Now, equities I refer to as the great businesses of the world, because simply they are just the businesses that we consume on a daily basis. We support those businesses by purchasing their products and services. And it's that relationship or the split between equities and bonds that drives returns over the longer term. So the simple formula is, the more equities that you have in your portfolio, the stronger the returns. Whereas if you've got more bonds, you'll have much lower returns. There's not much more in terms of the science in regards to that. But just in terms of a word on the stock market is, the word, stock market fills people with a lot of fear and trepidation. But should we really fear the great businesses globally? I mean, these are things that we consume, my Apple MacBook, my tablet, my phone, the car I drive, where I go and sometimes eat, the drinks I consume. These are all goods and services that are part of the stock market. So when we invest in the stock market, we literally are just supporting the goods and services that we consume. Now, I want to touch upon something which is really important, which is, why is investing so lucrative compared to just keeping money in cash? And that's because of the power of compounding. Now, a very clever chap, Albert Einstein, said that compounding was the eighth wonder of the world. And the concept is that your capital grows at a much faster rate over time because it earns interest on top of interest, or it's growth on top of growth. And if you think of an avalanche, it starts off as only a very tiny, small snowball at the top of the mountain. But by the time it reaches the bottom, it's a tremendous amount of energy and it causes a lot of destruction. And, wealth works in the same way, that it's hard and painful in the beginning. And for those of you that have, had businesses for a long time and have been building wealth, you'll also know that story that in the beginning, it's hard, but then actually it gets easier and easier as you've made more money. And all of this sort of, the best businessmen globally, talk to people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, and they'll always talk about the power of compounding. Now, just to illustrate this is, an example that we give is, would you rather have a penny, so 1p, that would double every day for 30 days, or receive £1 million up front? And when we run this experiment and we talk about this, people often say, well, yeah, I'll take £1 million up front, 1p doubling every day. What's that going to do? But if we look at compounding, we can see that after 15 days of the penny doubling, you're only at £163. So you're far worse off than, you know, taking the £1 million. But if we look at by day 30, a penny doubled every day has reached over 5.3 million, which dwarfs the original £1 million that you could have taken if you were entering into something like this. But the thing to notice is that it only started to catch up really, you know, after day 25, where it suddenly, you know, shot up, and by day 28, it's overtaken. But that just shows you that, you know, time is your biggest asset when it comes to investing. And the wisdom of starting early. So I don't know the sort of the age groups that we've got on the call today, but certainly something that I encourage clients, and especially, you know, clients that have children, is the wisdom of starting early. And this example, Khadija, aged 25, saves £100 per month for 40 years. So she's invested £48,000 in total. And if she was to get an 8% return on that money, the value of her pot at age 65 would be £322,000. Okay, so that's, you know, a very reasonable pot. Now, Ahmed, who's aged 55, decides to start saving £1,000 per month for 10 years. So if we look at it, he's invested £120,000. So that's like 60% more. He's got the same 8% return, but he's only got a pot valued at age 65 of 180,000, which is, you know, 45% less than Khadija. So it really shows the value of starting early, that, you know, someone can put in, you know, 2/3 less and get around 40% more because they started early. And that's because of compounding. There's another example here is, you know, making your child a millionaire by investing £300 per month for the first 18 years of their life. You would have invested £64,800 on their behalf. If we're assuming again an 8% return, after 18 years, that capital would be £140,597. But if you left that money now to be invested until their 60th birthday, so another 42 years, you would have turned that 140,000 into 3.5 million in real terms. So taking account of inflation, so in today's money, that would be over £1 million. And that's with a, you know, quite a modest investment. And not everyone can afford £300, but hopefully you get the message. So when we invest, there's always this idea of risk, and people are always, you know, quite concerned with risk. But there's 3 different types of risk that I just want to sort of cover off quickly. The first is the ice swan. Now, I don't know, Indar, if you have this, but whenever you go to a fancy wedding in the UK, or maybe in the US and other places, in the center of the room, there'll be this fantastic ice sculpture, usually in the shape of a swan. I've got no idea why, but it's a swan. And everyone takes pictures of it first thing when they get into the reception hall. 4 or 5 hours in, towards the end of the reception, you'll notice that that ice swan doesn't quite look as fantastic as it did when you arrived. It slowly started melting, but ever so slowly that no one really notices it. It just kind of drips away and gets disfigured. Inflation is exactly the same. It's a silent killer. If we look at the example of Her Majesty's stamps, over 30 years, the cost of a stamp in the UK has gone up 3.5 times, which is staggering. Now, I know that we don't live on stamps, but it's just a proxy. It's just an approximation for what happens in the real world. Now, I know in Dar, for example, that, you know, inflation is around 3.3% from the figures that I checked. And that's pretty similar to what we're experiencing in the UK. But historically, you know, the cost of living is going to increase or double every 30 years. Okay, so you've got to think that if you're thinking of stopping work at the age of 60 and you live until the age of 90, which we are living longer, you need to make sure that your assets have gone up in order to be able to support that rise in the cost of living. If your money hasn't doubled in value, then you're having to take a cut in the lifestyle that you're experiencing. So inflation is a real enemy. The next type of risk is what I call the turkey at Christmas. And again, sorry for using UK examples, but it's all I really know. But, you know, in the run up to Christmas, you know, people in the UK love turkeys. And so the turkeys are just getting fatter and fatter and fatter. Yeah. And it's fantastic because we are thinking that this is great. But, you know, come Christmas Eve, you know, all of those turkeys are sent and they suddenly get slaughtered and it's good night, you know, Khudafis. There's no coming back. And that's the real risk, that, you know, just like the turkey thinks that things are great because it's getting fattened up for Christmas, we see schemes and scams and all sorts every day, right? There's always a new crypto coin coming out and, you know, there's a new, you know, this new fad that everyone's talking about. And we kind of have that FOMO, fear of missing out, because it's the trend and someone suddenly, you know, up 40%, etc. But the problem with these kind of investments, and or I don't even call them investments, these kind of schemes are that it's just like the turkey. It can go up fantastically and everyone's sort of raving about it, but then suddenly it will be good night and it's loss of capital. And we've got to be really careful about that type of risk. And then the last type of risk, which is really the risk that applies to investments and investment funds and the stock market, is that of a roller coaster. You know, the roller coaster has ups and downs. It can be scary. It can be fun for some people. But despite how you feel, it's always safer to make sure that you're strapped in. Yeah, you don't want to like jump out of the roller coaster. And it's the same when you decide to invest. You want to be disciplined. You want to make sure that you're in it for the long haul and you stay strapped in. Something to just mention about investments, and you would hear this maybe in the news. If the news over in Dar is anything like it is over here, it's just constantly like, you know, noise. Yeah, I just call it noise. It's a distraction. You don't need to listen to it. But people will talk about bull and bear markets. So a bull market is, you know, when the markets have been rising for a considerable period of time, and a bear market is the opposite, when they've been going down. Now, the ups and downs of the stock market, the global stock market, it's a feature. There are always going to be ups and downs. That's where the returns come from. And if we look at this chart here, which goes back to 1925, and this is looking at the UK stock market. So again, a good approximation for the global stock market to some degree. We can see that the dark purple are those good periods. And those good periods have lasted for decades, sometimes 11 years, 12 years, 10 years, you know, 5-6 year periods, and fantastic returns over those periods. But you will see the light grey periods, which are the downturns, and they appear like clockwork every 5 or 6 years. Sometimes it's a bit longer, but they are always there. They're not going away. It's a feature of investing that there is this period where, you know, it gets a bit, you know, rocky. Investments do go down, but that's fine. That's just a feature of investing. It's nothing to be concerned about. Another thing that people talk about is, well, you know, stock market is dependent on who's in charge. You know, a different government comes in and it's going to affect, or the economy, etc. You know, it's all nonsense, because, you know, the data suggests that it doesn't really matter who's in charge. So here again, we've got UK equities. So the UK stock market, going back to 1925, you know, whether it's Conservative in the blue or Labour in the red, there's been ups and downs when both of them, you know, have been in charge. There is no pattern to this. What we do know is that equities have risen considerably over this period of time. But it doesn't matter who's in control, which party, it makes no difference. What should you expect by being an equity investor? Well, over the last 40 years, the average intra-year high to low of the US stock market has been 13.8%. So that's not to be confused with the annual return. The intra-year high to low just means that during an average year, the high point to the low point at some point in the year will be around minus 14%. You're going to experience a high to low of minus 14. It doesn't say what value the stock market will end on for that year, but during that year there will be some sort of a dip, and that's just what we need to make sure that when we start investing that we're disciplined, but we've got an expectation around, you know, how things will perform, so that we're not caught out and we don't panic, because the number one detrimental thing that people do when they invest is they panic and they sell out. And then they say, well, you know, the stock market doesn't work and the returns aren't there and it's, you know, it's not great, this, that, the other. But it was their own behavior that caused their downfall. So I'm going to wrap up there because I'm going to now introduce Chris Emmett. Now, Chris is previously a UK financial advisor, and he's worked in financial services for quite a number of years, and he's worked for some international you know, financial institutions, but he now specializes in advising international clients. He's based out in Chile in South America, and he's a partner at EBG International. And I thought he would be a fantastic person to come in and talk to people in Dar around some of the things to be aware of when you know, investing as an international investor. So Chris, if you're around, maybe unmute yourself, and I'm going to pass it over to you, and maybe we can just give Chris permission to share his screen.
Sheba, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Perfect. Apologies, I was running on a different timeline to you guys, so I'm currently driving in the car in lovely sunny Santiago here. So I'll probably leave the camera off so you don't have to look at the side of my head. I've been listening in, and I think you've covered some really, really good ground there. What I find very often in the international market is people think because it's international, they're not sitting in London or New York, and there's going to be something more complicated going on. And it really isn't, in my experience. I think you've covered a lot of the basics there. You know, invest in the great companies of the world, invest over the long term, don't panic, follow good behavior. Now, the issue that a lot of my clients find is that when you're in a developing nation or a sort of international market,
I think we lost him.
We've lost him. So I think what we can do is, I don't mind maybe.
I think
back?
I'm back. Yeah, I think my my laptop switched itself off. So where was I when it cut out?
I think you were saying how great I was and how you found my part really great.
Yes, well I did. I think you really covered the key ground, which is that this can actually be quite a simple thing and not to be daunted. There's a couple of very simple rules to follow. My experience, though, dealing primarily in developing markets, and again from an international standpoint, is that the financial services industry tries to muddy the water a little bit. They make it sound as if it's more complicated than it is, and through that they can obviously recommend some weird and wonderful products which sound fantastic, but at the end of the day there's nothing really better than a big basket of the world's greatest companies, and history is our guide. That will always be the right way to invest. I think in terms of consideration, so I guess the most valuable thing is just to cover off a couple of pitfalls that I've seen people come across. And the first one is, don't always just go to the bank, because a lot of banks, doesn't matter where in the world, to be honest, it could be New York, London or Geneva, but a lot of banks will only have their own solutions and products, and they'll tend to be fairly expensive and quite often overly complicated. So that'd be one thing. The main thing to know is that when you're looking after your money, as well as planning in your local currency for near-term needs that will arise, is to choose a solid global currency. So I tend to work primarily with dollars, but we also look at euros and yen and sterling, depending on the client. but hold them in a secure jurisdiction. That's the number one thing. And then once they're held in a secure jurisdiction, in a grown-up fund, which doesn't have to be complicated, let's say it's a global world's biggest 10,000 companies fund, you make sure that, as Shaba said, you have good succession planning around that. So if anything happens to you, then you're not creating a problem for the people that you leave behind. Money is easily accessible, identifiable, and can be passed on to your family without slowing down through things like probate processes and tax assessments and the like. So it's really a case of keeping things simple, choosing a solid currency, choosing the right jurisdiction, and not letting yourself be overawed by impressive sounding men in suits that are trying to confuse you. I think that would probably be my main, if you just had sort of 3 tips, that'd be the main things I'd look at.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Chris. And thanks for
No problem.
Oh, there, we can see you now. You're in your car.
Yeah, just pulled up. I would have been perfectly on time if I'd have noticed what this was and didn't get confused by the time change. Apologies for that.
No problem. Is there anything that you wanted to sort of, I mean, if you wanted to run in, and was there anything more that you wanted to add, or should we just open it to Q&A? Because I'm sure people have got a lot of questions and stuff like that. So
yeah, jump onto Q&A, and then if anything comes up, I'll be there. I might lose your signal for a second as I jump into the house, but I'll be back in moments.
Okay, that's fine. Let's potentially open up for some questions and see if there's anything that we can sort of shed some light on.
Excellent. Thank you, Shaba. Lovely presentation. I'm sure most of us have gained a lot out of it. Definitely good insight from Chris as well. It would be lovely for him to look at Tanzania as a market on the international side, and then see how Tanzanians can benefit and what legislatory requirements are there for international stock exchange and other monetary funds available. One of the questions that I have recently just received is, you looked into 8% as a return of investment. Any background information or data that you used to arrive at that percent to be on a compounding continuous basis for forthcoming years?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I should have caveated that. So I used 8% because there's quite a few studies that have been done, but Barclays do a study like a global equity kind of survey, and historically over the sort of the last 40-50 years, world equities have sort of compounded at around 8%. So it's a good proxy to use, around 8% for global equities. I found, I don't know, Chris might want to sort of chip in, but I think you could be a bit more, I think if you go back and look at, let's say, like the S&P 500, for example, I think you might get a more punchier number. You might be sort of nearing sort of double digits over the last sort of 50, 60 years. But I think that 8 is a good number to use. And
I think it's a good indication. It's a good ballpark. But what I'd normally do is, if I was planning for something in the future, I might go a little bit more conservative in my projections, because I'm not going to be upset if in 20 years I've got more money than I needed. But, you're going to be pretty upset if you don't land at the number that you needed to provide the lifestyle for yourself and your family down the line. So 8 is a good proxy, but that also depends on the investor behaving themselves and not sort of trying to jump in and out of markets. And a lot of the data shows that that's the biggest enemy of returns. And Shaba just covered it, is people thinking that today, this time it's different when there's a decline in the market, or thinking the next new thing, the next shiny new thing is going to be the solution to all your dreams. So 8% is reasonable over the long term, so long as you invest sensibly and don't sort of panic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, 8 was just a number. It could have been 6, it could have been 5. But when we do financial planning, so the whole bucket thing, we're much more strict with the percentages that we use, because, like I said, we rather overshoot than under. So there's a question here: how do you work out what size of bucket to start with? Well, so the question, the answer is that you start out with whatever you've got, because you're only able to, fill a bucket through the resources that you've got. Now, that might be your, what we call human capital. So your ability to work and earn money, that might be the only way that you fill your bucket to begin with. So we're not working out what you should start with. We're working out what you need to end with. So the bucket needs to be of a certain amount in order to be able to fund the lifestyle that you want. So what we actually need to work out when we do financial planning is you need to have a very honest conversation with, your wife, or if it's just you, but, how much are you spending, but also how much would you like to spend? Because life is about living as well. So it might be that, there are things that you want to do in the future that would really be important to you. So matching your values to your money is a very important exercise as well. And something that I do with my clients is, what's the money for? Because we all go to work and we all, try our best because we want to provide a certain lifestyle. So what is that lifestyle? And once you know what the cost of that lifestyle is, then you know what assets you need to build up and over what period in order to achieve your goals. So hopefully that answers that. If not, just shout. Any other questions?
Thank you, Shabar. Let me remind all the participants, you can always put in a chat if you want to ask any questions, and Shabar will be happy to answer. Chris is also there for yourself, and I'm sure he will be happy to as well look into the questions and answer yourself. So feel free, put the questions, jot them down, and inshallah they will look into them.
One question, Amin, is a question. Is it possible to have the slides, Shabir?
Is it possible to have the slides?
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that should be fine. I don't see there being an issue with providing the slides.
Right. All right. Did you record it or you didn't record it?
I think it's being recorded because I can see recording in the top left corner. So I presume someone's recording it.
Okay.
Yes,
so...
it is on the record, and it's also available on YouTube. So you can always refer to it under JIBA page on YouTube later on.
Okay. Can you send the link on the chat so we can write it down?
Yes, sure. We will have that shared with all of you.
Okay.
Just while people are thinking of questions, you mentioned there briefly, can we work with people? Can we help people that are in Tanzania? Yes, that would be perfectly possible. I've got clients in East Africa, the Middle East. So that's completely possible. The main thing is finding the right jurisdictions that work. So we just double check that there's no sort of countries where it wouldn't make sense for people to place money, but we would typically use sort of A-grade jurisdictions with strong sort of asset custodians and strong investment funds from, the world's biggest fund managers. So perfectly possible to do that for anybody that's over there.
Do you sort of advise in which jurisdiction you're going to put and what kind of structure you're going to put for inheritance and capital gain and all that?
Yeah, exactly. So what we would normally do is we'd find a tax neutral jurisdiction. So somewhere that won't tax you as an overseas investor, because what we don't want is to, let's say placing assets in the United States is quite a popular thing for people around the world. What they don't take into account is the capital gains tax there, the inheritance tax. If you have assets in the States and you're not a national, then you've got a pretty low limit before you start paying inheritance tax. So picking the correct jurisdiction is always a strong start point. The next stage from that is picking the custodian. So which bank or investment house would be looking after the money on a day-to-day basis. And then from there, we lead down into the right asset split, how many shares, how many bonds, as Shab was explaining, the difference between equities and bonds, and choosing underlying fund managers from there. So it's kind of a funneling approach that always has to start with a personal understanding of circumstances and future goals, as Shab was explaining.
Okay.
There's another question that has just come in. Are there any jurisdictions where you can invest on your children who are still under 18? any one of you, Shabar or Chris, who would like to take it?
Chris, go for it.
Yeah, shall I take that one?
Yeah.
Most banks or investment houses will have the option to invest on behalf of a child, but you would normally, if they're under 18, you would normally remain on the account. If it's gifting to a child where that's accepted, or let's say it's an over 18-year-old child, then all that bank or institution would need to do is understand the reason for the source of the money. So I'm doing one for somebody at the moment where we've written a clear letter saying, I'm gifting this to my child. I don't need this money anymore. I'm sort of giving up my rights to it, and it's now their money. Typically, the way that the banking system works now is all banks and investment companies are very tight on understanding the nature of where money has come from. So long as it's framed in the right way and we structure it clearly and accordingly, then it should always be a possibility.
Chris, there's a question that's come up. For international investors, do we need to pay taxes on gain?
I think in terms of where you hold your assets, so we would always look to hold assets in a place where there is no tax on the growth. If you're not a resident there, then you're not paying any tax on the gain. When it comes to reporting your growth or your returns in your home country, it obviously varies by different jurisdiction. So I'm not completely up on Tanzania. I can look into it, but there'd be no tax as the money's growing. So as Shab was saying, the power of compounding, if you're not taking taxes off, then a bigger fund is compounding. Even if later on your country requires you to pay tax on your growth when you realize it, you've had the benefit of growth on money that otherwise would have been taken away earlier in tax. And we'll always look to use structures where if we're making purchases or sales, let's say if you had $50,000 worth of Google 10 years ago, and now it's worth $500,000, and you wanted to cash out today, so long as it's held in the right structure, then that gain is not on you personally, it's within the account. So just with the right sort of structuring, then taxes can be deferred, or depending on where you realize your gains later in their tax rules, it could be completely tax-free. But what we'd always say is speak to your accountant in your home jurisdiction, and we can liaise with them so that we're fully aware of any potential issues that could come up down the line, and we'll try and mitigate and plan for those.
Are you saying it's better to sort of structure it in a company and buy the shares in a company structure, so you don't get the capital gains on yourself?
Sometimes that makes sense. Quite often that can just lead to extra complications and lawyers' fees. I find a simple solution in my mind is always the best solution. But what we would use is a type of account where your asset is the account, and then they own the things that are within it. So it's all your money, but from a legal tax reporting structure, you own an account. So the day-to-day trading that might go on within that is not sort of constantly reportable. So you roll up the gain. And then in terms of how you can hold it, then most of what we do tends to be in the client's own name, but sometimes there's reasons or benefits to holding that through a trust or a company structure, or maybe even something like a foundation, which is a little bit like a trust, but for sort of civil law jurisdictions where they don't understand the concepts of trusts. There's lots of things that can be done. I always try and keep it as simple as it can be while getting the desired result.
Yeah, I understand.
And just to follow on from that, and I mean, this applies for my clients in the UK, and I think it applies for Chris's clients as well, internationally, that when you've got a reasonable amount of wealth, and it doesn't have to be excessive, but having a good accountant, a good financial advisor, financial planner, and a good solicitor is vitally important when it comes to managing your money. And the idea would be is that what you pay in fees to those people should be returned to you in multiples in the value that you get. Now, whether that's in returns or whether that's in savings or just from stopping you making a costly mistake, people employ me ongoing because I'm their sort of defense against disaster, because potentially there's something that I'll stop them from doing which will cost them tens of thousands of pounds. So fees are often justified in different ways, but I think having a good team around you is vitally important, especially when it comes to some of the more complicated areas. So, that's just something to add on to what sort of Chris was talking about in terms of your accountant, vitally important.
Thank you, Shabar. I have one question on me that came through. Somebody is asking in regards to cryptocurrency and your take on it, and if it is advised to invest into it, and your take generally.
Do you want to go, Chris? Or
I think we'll both say something very similar on this. Cryptocurrencies, that new shiny thing that could be the Christmas turkey potentially. We don't know where it will go. I think some form of digital asset will be part of the future for sure, but at the moment there's got to be 200 of these different things, and a lot of them will turn out to be Betamax and not VHS. There'll be a couple that work and a lot will disappear. My own take on it with my clients is that 5% of your assets, 10%, but it's more of a gamble than it is an investment. And don't put anything in it that if it went to zero, it can't affect your family's long-term wealth. And if it works, great. But personally, I'd always stick to the things that have always worked, as opposed to the thing that looks like it's working today. That would be my personal call on it. I'd rather plan in US dollars, let's say, which is the global reserve currency, than something that may work really well, but I could also lose. So don't put enough in it to necessarily make a killing out of it, but at the same time, don't put enough in it that you could be killed by it, would be my sort of take on that.
Yeah, spot on. Absolutely. And actually, I mean, this is just important, because people talk about, different types of investments, and we've sort of talked a bit about sort of equities, global companies, and bonds and property. And people say, oh, I'm going to invest in crypto. The definition of an investment has always been, for me, something that gives you a total return. I think this is quite important to understand, that a total return comes from an appreciating capital value of the asset. So, for example, your property will appreciate in value, but also your property gives you an income, again, rising with inflation more often than not. So you've got two forms of return, what's called total return, which is rising capital value, rising income. And traditionally, the assets that deliver that are businesses, stocks and shares, whatever you want to call it, businesses and bricks, property, right? Those are the two assets. So anything, for example, like crypto, which comes along, is a speculation, because just by its very nature, it doesn't have any value other than what someone else is willing to pay for it. And I hope that can be sort of understood. Whereas the reason why a stock is worth what it is, okay, there are fluctuations which can be, based on the emotion or the environment that you find yourself in. But generally, it's because of the profits that are going to be generated by that company. And if you just think about a company that you would invest in, you're going to invest and pay a lot more for a company that's got a very, profitable business. And the same way, you're going to pay a lot more for a property that's going to generate a much higher, rental. That's just common sense, right? But with, how do you value a crypto? What's good value for a crypto? Well, because it's gone up from, $50,000 to $65,000, and you think that it might go to 100,000. Well, it's only going to go to 100,000 if there are enough people willing to pay that. And that's the thing to be aware of, that these things, are only based on what someone else is willing to pay for them. And that's why they tend to be speculative. But
I would agree with what Chris said, that, from all your assets, what you have, you put 1% or 5% of that in the crypto, and if you lose that, that's your risk capital, so it doesn't affect your lifestyle or your affects you anyways. Don't put more than that. But the thing about crypto is a new asset class that has come that not many people don't understand it. It's like, you had the traditional business models, then you had the platform business model where the Uber came in and all of them. Now this is a new business model that has come up. It's called the network business model. So the more the network grows, the more value increases. There's a thing called Metcalfe law. So every person that joins the network, the value of that increases by square. So crypto is into that world. It's a very new phenomenon. It's a very new business model. This kind of a business model, we've not had. The closest thing to this business model is the Facebook. All right. So, and people don't understand that. They said there's no backing on the crypto thing. The backing of the crypto is the network. Right. So I agree with you. There are about 2,000 cryptos at the moment. From that's going to survive would be a maximum of 10. No, Bitcoin is as they say, digital gold. It's been there for 12 years. It's not been hacked, right? So it is very strong from the blockchain perspective. Ethereum, Cardano, and the other ones are the close one. So, and yeah, there are at the moment, what's that Netflix film?
Squid
Game, yeah.
Squid, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They launched a crypto and it went up and just dropped down, but there were telltale signs that this was going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously that was just a complete farce because there was no credibility to that whatsoever. But no, I put my hands up and say that I don't understand it. And if I don't understand it, there's no way that I can advise my clients. But I think as Chris rightly said, as long as, at the end of the day, if I was sitting with a client and as long as their bucket, going back to the bucket, as long as their bucket doesn't get blown up because they put money into crypto, knock yourself out, absolutely, but, if a family's entrusting me with their future finances, I think, obviously as a professional, that's where you've got to draw the line and say, I can't be advising on things that I don't actually understand fully myself or know how they work. So yeah, as we said, everyone, when it comes to people's money, it's a very emotional thing as well. And certain people need to be entrepreneurial with their money, and that's fine. But yeah, be sensible, I think is the name of the game.
There's a tactic I've used, Shaba, a couple of times. Well, I deal with quite a lot of relatively young tech executives. So we've got TikTok over in Dubai, we've got clients, Google all around the world. And where they're so passionately bought into this idea of crypto being the future, I've decided to, sort of just let them put 10% into that, because that way they're more likely to leave their solid money alone.
Yeah.
So what we do is got a few guys where we're just 10% of their savings budget each month just goes into dollar cost averaging, which is a concept where you're buying every price point on a regular basis. We just do a dollar cost average purchase of Ethereum once a month for a couple of $100, $500, depending on what it is that they're saving and putting away, because means they're less likely to then dip into their family's wealth to make a speculative gamble at a random day and time, because the prices of these things shoots up and down like crazy.
True. I know if time allows, everybody will have a lot of more questions. So just to wrap up things, and I'm sure that they can reach out to either Shabar or Chris if they still have more questions, or to us, and then we can pass them on to you and you can touch base with them over email or so. I would like to personally, and through JIBA, like to thank both of you. Shabar, it was lovely to have you here. Amazing presentation, great insights. Loved the bucket theory. I'm sure many will take with them this home, and they will use it and see how to make sure it doesn't overflow. And if it does, the overflow goes into ideal investments so that they can have a better, good retirement in the future. Chris, thank you. Time was messed up, but we really appreciate you giving out time and being together with us today and putting through a few lovely insights that I'm sure everybody will benefit from today and in the future. So asante sana to all the participants who are here as well. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. And I hope the event or the videos or the seminar was good for yourselves and it benefited you in one way or the other. Asante sana.
Thank you, everyone. Khadafis. Take care.
Thank you, Khadafis, Shaba. Thank you, Chris. See you all.